Hey everyone, it's Anna and Tucker. And today I wanted to share with you 25 classics that you should be reading in 2025. And you might be wondering, why does classic literature matter today? Well, there's a few reasons. Timeless themes are usually explored in classic literature and they remain relevant today. It also offers us a unique window into the past and helps us understand the present a little bit better. It helps you expand your vocabulary, deepen your understanding of human nature, and it might even bring you some new insights and parallels into modern books that you've either read recently or you're going to read in the near future. Also, it might help you draw some parallels in movies and TV shows, plays, and other facets of life that you may not have realized have been drawing from classic works this entire time. One recent example I can think of is the most recent Hunger Games novel, Sunrise on the Reaping, that was recently released. I'm listening to it right now on audiobook. It references one of the authors that has a book here on my list that I'll share with you later. But I wonder if you can guess which one it's going to be. You'll have to watch and find out. So, why else do we read classic literature? What is so appealing about reading stories that were written 50, 100, sometimes hundreds of years ago, maybe even thousands of years ago, when we've got so many modern books to draw from, and many modern books are fantastic, and several of them are probably on their way to becoming classics themselves. When you engage with more traditional classic works, they can offer a sense of grounding and a sense of connection to something larger than yourself. They can foster a sense of community and a shared experience. They can provide us with a greater understanding of our own worlds and our own experiences in the grander scheme of things. And you might be worried, shoot, classic literature seems like it would be really difficult to read, and you might be a little scared by it, but there is no need to be scared. Picking up a classic novel does not have to be daunting or scary. There is a wide range of classics, both in general and on my list, and if you're not confident, you should start with something short and sweet. Usually the shorter works, not always, but usually the shorter works tend to be a little less complex and easier to get your feet wet when it comes to reading classics. When choosing which classic novel to start out with, you also want to consider your personal interests and what your reading preferences are, or what your reading preferences have been when it comes to reading more modern books. Do you trend toward fantasy? Do you trend towards general fiction or a mystery and thriller or science fiction or any of those? A hero's journey, let's say. All of those genres exist in classic works. They just may not look exactly the way you're used to, but that's okay. You may want to consider starting with a classic that's been made into a movie or a TV show that you already know you like, something that you're familiar with, the general plot points of the story, so that when you read the book, you're generally familiar with the characters and what's going on, and you don't, run the risk of becoming confused. So keeping all of that in mind, I've come up with a curated list of 25 works that I think are relevant to 2025, that I think people would still be interested in reading, that still really hold up against the test of time. I have ordered them from what I think would be easiest to pick up to probably what I think would be the most complex to pick up. And there's a wide range of reasons, from the length of the book to the complexity of the language or the time period that it might be referencing. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I have a special category of books if you happen to like darker kind of sci-fi fantasy themed books. I have a very short list to share with you at the end of the video. So let's start with the something short and sweet. The first book that I'd recommend reading is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This book explores the themes of the American dream and the futility of hanging on to the past. This is quite a popular novel. It's been made into at least one movie, I think two actually. And it's quite a popular story in general. As you can see, it's very short. And the story itself is not too complex. The Great Gatsby is a consummate summary of the roaring 20s and a devastating expose of the jazz age. I have read this book. It's been a while, so I don't remember everything that happens, but it is really good, and it's a really good starter novel on your journey through classic works. The next suggestion I have for you is a fun one. It's A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Now, we all know this story, right? It's a classic story. There's been lots of movies and TV shows. There's The Muppets Christmas. There's, a Disney Christmas Carol. There's all kinds of versions of the Christmas Carol. But as you can see, again, it's really short. I think it's like less than 100 pages. Yeah, it's less than 100 pages. It's short and sweet. And the themes that it explores are universal. There is a reason why this story is one of Dickens' most loved stories. It's a story about redemption, compassion, generosity, and what happens if you're a little Scroogey. The next book in the short and sweet category is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. This one, again, is, I think, just over 100 pages. It's short and sweet, and this deals with the themes of dreams, loneliness, and companionship. It's a really popular book to read in high school and AP English classes. It's an intimate portrait of two men who cherish the slim bond between them and the dream they share in a world marred by petty tyranny, misunderstanding, jealousy, and callousness. And the last book I have for you in the short and sweet category is Animal Farm by George Orwell. Animal Farm is one that I have not read, but this is a recent purchase for me, and so it is on my list to read this year. As you can see, again, it's really short, less than 100 pages, 97 in fact. And this is a timely novel that is great to read right now. It deals with power and corruption. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Okay, my next category of classics you should try are novels that are probably about the same in complexity, but just a little bit longer, trend towards a normal length of novel. The first one I have is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is another really popular high school pick. If you are a teenager high schooler watching, I highly recommend that you pay close attention to all the books on this list, because if you have any hopes to take an AP class junior or senior year, many of these books are going to be on your reading list, or should be. But To Kill a Mockingbird is a favorite among many people because it deals with justice in an unjust world through the eyes of a 6-year-old girl whose dad is a lawyer in the Deep South defending a black man who was wrongly accused of a crime. The next suggestion I have is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This is not one that I have personally read. This is a personal copy that I have. It's my daughter's copy, but she really enjoyed this book when she read this last year. The Outsiders deals with bridging the gap between the rich and the poor. A heroic story of friendship and belonging. No one ever said life was easy, but Ponyboy is pretty sure he's got things figured out. He knows that he can count on his brothers, Dairy and Soda Pop, and he knows that he can count on his friends, true friends, who would do anything for him, like Johnny and Two-Bit. And when it comes to the Sox, a vicious gang of rich kids who enjoy beating up on greasers like him and his friends, he knows that he can count on them for trouble. But one night, someone takes things too far, and Ponyboy's world is turned upside down. Next on this list is a book I've mentioned in a previous book haul, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This is a book that deals with technology and control and what happens when the government has too much control. It's a satiric vision of a utopian future where humans are genetically bred and pharmaceutically anesthetized to passively serve a ruling order. This is a book that makes you think. And the last book in this category is one of my favorites. It's very enjoyable to read because, quite frankly, it's got some very colorful language and a lot of humor in it. And it is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. And this book mainly deals with themes of isolation. It's told from the eyes of a boy named Holden, who is 16 years old and dealing with the troubles of just not feeling like he fits in anywhere. He talks exactly like you would think a typical 16-year-old talks. And he's got some really interesting thoughts. This book also deals with the concept of protecting the innocent, a loss of innocence, that type of thing, through the eyes of a 16-year-old boy. It's very good, and I highly, highly recommend this one in particular. Okay, moving on. The next category is an average-sized book, but a bit more complexity. And this is probably the category with the most number of books to choose from. The first book I have is a very famous coming-of-age story, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer comes before the book The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, although in this book you are introduced to both of those characters, both Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Mark Twain created the memorable characters Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, drawing from the experiences of boys he grew up with in Missouri. Set by the Mississippi River in the 1840s, it follows these boys as they get into predicament after predicament. Tom's classic whitewashing of the fence has become part of American culture, and the book paints a nostalgic picture of life in the middle of the 19th century. Tom runs away from home to an island in the river, chases Injun Joe and his treasure, and even gets trapped in a cave for days with Becky Thatcher. This book is one of Twain's most beloved stories. And I agree, it's very, very good. So, of course, I also had to put The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which is the follow-up to The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. This deals with slightly different themes. This one deals with the themes of freedom, civilization, and prejudice. Huckleberry Finn, rebel against school and church, casual inheritor of gold treasure, is the archetypal American maverick. Fleeing the respectable society that wants to civilize him, Huck Finn shoves off with the runaway slave Jim on a rhapsodic raft journey down the Mississippi River. The two bind themselves to one another, becoming intimate friends and agreeing that, quote, "There warn't no home like a raft, after all. Other places do seem so cramped up and smothery, but a raft don't." As Huck learns about love, responsibility, and morality, the trip becomes a metaphoric voyage through his own soul, culminating in the glorious moment when he decides to go to hell rather than return Jim to slavery. The next book in the list is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This book deals with the themes of beauty and the consequences of vanity. The story of Dorian Gray has been integrated into several different TV shows and movies. I think there is an entire movie about The Picture of Dorian Gray, but I do know that Dorian Gray is a character in The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which is a movie with Sean Connery that came out a couple decades ago. Dorian Gray shows up in a lot of different places in pop culture today, even though this book was written, first published in, this isn't an original publishing, so you have to look. The Picture of Dorian Gray originally appeared in the July 1890 issue of Lippincott's Monthly Magazine. The present text, so this one right here, is that of the first volume edition published the following year. So, the original story was published in 1891, but Dorian Gray still remains a very popular pop culture figure. The next book on my list is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This is the special 60th anniversary edition that came out a few years ago. And I think it's a very timely book to read if you are interested. It deals with a society that doesn't allow people to read. They burned books. There are literally people whose job it is to find books and then burn them. That is what a fireman is in this book. It's not someone who puts out fires. A fireman is someone who goes and burns books. Guy Montag is a fireman. His job is to destroy the most illegal of commodities, the printed book, along with the houses in which they are hidden. Montag never questions the destruction and ruin his actions produce, returning each day to his bland life and wife, Mildred, who spends all day with her television family. But when he meets an eccentric young neighbor, Clarice, who introduces him to a past where people didn't live in fear, and to a present where one sees the world through the ideas in books instead of the mindless chatter of television, Montag begins to question everything he has ever known. And so the theme of this book is man versus society. Your beliefs versus what society says you should believe. The next book on my list is not one that I have personally read, but is suggested on many different lists of classic books you should read, and that is Beloved by Toni Morrison. This is a book that is about a woman who was a slave, who ran away, and had a terrible secret come back to haunt her 18 years later. This book is mainly about sacrificial love and what would you do for your child. The next book I have is Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Again, I have not read this one personally, but this book shows up on a lot of other lists as recommended, and this one deals with identity and race. First published in 1952 and immediately hailed as a masterpiece, Invisible Man is one of those rare novels that have changed the shape of American literature. For not only does Ralph Ellison's nightmare journey across the racial divide tell unparalleled truths about the nature of bigotry and its effects on the minds of both victims and perpetrators, it gives us an entirely new model of what a novel can be. Next on my list is A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway is a prolific American author. You could actually probably pick up any of his works and you would be in good company. I have not read A Farewell to Arms. I picked this up in a recent book haul, and I am excited to get into this one eventually. This particular edition is a special Barnes & Noble edition, which includes all 39 original endings that Hemingway wrote. Which, I wonder, I mean, did he write 39 or did he write 40? And the 40th one is the one he included in the final book. I'm not sure. But this is a book that deals with love and loss and fear and courage because it's set amidst the backdrop of World War I. A Farewell to Arms is the unforgettable story of an American ambulance driver on the Italian front and his passion for a beautiful English nurse. And the last book in this category is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. Again, I haven't read this one, but I did pick this one up recently in a book haul, and so I have every intention of reading it sometime this year. This book deals with the cycle of life and the limits of science. Charlie Gordon is about to embark upon an unprecedented journey. Born with an unusually low IQ, he has been chosen as the perfect subject for an experimental surgery that researchers hope will increase his intelligence, a procedure that has already been highly successful when tested on a lab mouse named Algernon. All right, we're about halfway through the list, and we've made it to the category of works of varying length that might be potentially challenging. So a little bit harder than the previous category, but still not too bad. The first one I have is another Dickens novel, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. This novel is so famous that a lot of people have heard the opening line of the novel, and you may not have even read it. The opening line of this novel is, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." If you've ever heard that phrase, it comes from A Tale of Two Cities. This is a book about revolution, sacrifice, and resurrection, and it's one of Dickens' most loved works. It takes place during the French Revolution. From the storming of the Bastille to the relentless drop of the guillotine, Dickens vividly captures the terror and upheaval of that tumultuous period. At the center is the novel's hero, Sidney Carton, a lazy, alcoholic, but honorable attorney who is in love with Lucy Manette, a beautiful woman brought up in London. When Lucy marries a man condemned to death for his ties to the aristocratic Evrémonde family, I don't speak French, sorry. Carton makes the supreme sacrifice on the blood-stained streets of Paris. The next book I have is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. And this book was originally written in Russian, has been translated many times over. To be honest, it scares me a little bit. It is a very big book. It's 600 and some odd pages of very small print. But this is a book that, again, deals with the themes of justice. It is a novel of damnation and redemption, and evokes a world where the lines between innocence and corruption, good and evil, blur. It tells the story of a man who is a destitute and desperate former student who wanders through the slums of St. Petersburg and commits a random murder without remorse or regret. He imagines himself to be beyond conventional moral laws. But as he embarks on a dangerous game of cat and mouse with a police investigator, he is pursued by the growing voice of his conscience and finds the noose of his own guilt tightening around his neck. The next book I have is a fairly famous work. It is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This was one of my favorite books when I was a child. Even though it's further down in this list, I don't think that this is an overly challenging book. It is quite long. This version is, 400 and 500 pages or so. But you'll see different page counts depending on the print. But Little Women has been made into multiple movies. I think it's been made into a musical even recently. It's a very popular story and mainly deals with the themes of family and love and what you would do for your family. It centers around a mom and her 4 daughters, all during the Civil War era. Their father is away at war and their mom has to take care of them, and each of them are growing up very quickly. Each of the girls, the March sisters, has a very prominent role in this book. This book is guaranteed to make you laugh, cry, get angry, feel all kinds of feelings about the characters in this book. It is very, very well written. There's a reason why this is a classic and a well-loved story. The next book I have has also been made into many movies and miniseries and TV shows. It is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And again, you could probably fill this slot with any other Jane Austen novel. I just happen to really like Pride and Prejudice, but you could go with Emma, you could go with Persuasion, you can go with any of those. All the Austen books are great. But this particular book deals with the themes of prejudice, redemption, and class. And the last book in this category is another Dickens. It is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. This is another coming-of-age story that is very, very popular to read in high school. And so if you haven't read it, you should put it on your list. There's a lot of pop culture references to Great Expectations. It's been made into, again, at least one movie, probably multiple movies. There's a lot of derivative stories based on Great Expectations. It is one of the most classic of classic novels. Okay, and we've made it to my last official category, and that is probably the hardest books on this list. Again, they're all great stories, and they're not overly hard. The things that make them complex are things like the time period they were written in and the language that's used. It takes a little bit of getting used to, and so it can make it a little more difficult to read because, a book that was written a couple hundred years ago, they don't speak the same way we do today, and so it can present a bit of a challenge. Also, the concepts in some of these books are a little more abstract and can be a little harder to grasp, but it's also what makes some of these books so great. The first book I have is Wuthering Heights from Emily Bronte. She is one half of the Bronte sisters. Again, this is a very popular story in pop culture. It's been made into movies and miniseries and all that. This is Emily Bronte's only novel, actually. but it remains one of literature's most disturbing explorations into the dark side of romantic passion. So this book deals with the pursuit of love, an unpolished and devastating epic of childhood playmates who grow into soulmates. Wuthering Heights revolves around the willfully childish Catherine and the dark Heathcliff, who, in the words of Charlotte Bronte, exemplifies the effects which a life of continued injustice and hard usage may produce on a naturally perverse, vindictive, and inexorable disposition. Heathcliff and Cathy believe they're destined to love each other forever. But when cruelty and snobbery separate them, their untamed emotions literally consume them. The next book on my list is from the other Bronte sister, Charlotte Bronte. We have Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre, again, is one of my favorites on this list. I haven't read it in a very long time, and so a lot of the details escaped me, but I have read this book multiple times over my life. I keep reading it. This is actually a special edition that was gifted to me about 20 years ago. I've had this this book. It is an illustrated Jane Eyre. It's beautiful, actually. It's got these beautiful illustrations every once in a while. Here's another one. They're very pretty. I have never actually read this copy because I just want to keep it really nice. But Jane Eyre is a coming-of-age story that is, again, very popular in pop culture today. It is a bit of a chunky book, as you can see, but it's well worth the journey if you can get through it. Born with a spirit that yearns to break free from social and class bonds, Charlotte Bronte's independent heroine begins her life as a discarded orphan, but emerges as a young woman with a strong character and sense of self. This epic romance remains one of the best-loved Victorian novels of all time. The next book on my list is The Odyssey by Homer. Again, a really classic story that was written thousands of years ago. This is the oldest book on the list, but it deals with perseverance and resilience in the face of adversity. And so this book follows Odysseus and his journey home, his 20-year journey with all kinds of perils and the gods, creating all these obstacles for him to just get home to his family. Long before The Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Harry Potter, the ancient Greek poet Homer established the standard for tales and epic quests and heroic journeys with the Odyssey. So this is the original hero's journey. All other hero's journeys all stem from Homer's great work. You could also sub the Iliad in for the Odyssey if you'd like. I think the Iliad was written before the Odyssey, but either of those, you could sub both of these in. And again, this is a translated text, so there are slightly different versions. There are simplified versions that are out there that you could pick up and start with first. If a directly translated work scares you a little too much, you could start with that. The next book on my list is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Again, this is a very popular pick for high school classes, and it deals with guilt, societal judgment, and the struggle between individual freedom and societal conformity. This is the classic story of Hester, who strays from her marriage and has an affair, and it's found out, and she is made to walk around town with a scarlet letter emblazoned on every single piece of clothing that she has. This novel asks a lot of important questions and deals with a lot of important themes that I think were relevant then, relevant now, and will continue to be relevant for time eternal. The next book I have on my list is actually not that long. It's less than 200 pages. It is The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Now, the reason why this book is in the hardest category is because this is one of those books that's very cerebral. It deals with themes of isolation, and Kafka can be difficult to kind of understand, but that shouldn't deter you from reading this book. It's really good. It's absurd. It's good because it's just so absurd in its premise, but what happens in the book is really the reason why it's on this list. When Gregor Samsa woke up one morning from unsettling dreams, he found himself changed in his bed into a monstrous vermin. With this startling, bizarre, yet surprisingly funny first sentence, Kafka begins his masterpiece, The Metamorphosis. It is the story of a young man who, transformed overnight into a giant beetle-like insect, becomes an object of disgrace to his family, an outsider in his own home, and a quintessentially alienated man. And the last book in this category is Hamlet by Shakespeare. Again, you could substitute Hamlet with any other Shakespeare work. I've not read much Shakespeare in my life, which is unfortunate. I really have only read Romeo and Juliet, but I would like to read more Shakespeare. Shakespeare's very difficult to understand. You know, the iambic pentameter, the poetic verse is very hard for people to grasp. This version of Hamlet is actually really cool because it's got the original text on one side, and then it's got, like, in layman's terms on the other side. So it's a direct one-to-one translation, and so you can read it in its original form, and then you can read the modernized version so that you can understand what's actually going on. And this is actually how I read Romeo and Juliet in high school. So Hamlet is one of Shakespeare's most well-known classics. It's a tragedy, and again, a lot of pop culture and other books are not based on Hamlet, but, you know, have ties to Hamlet, draw inspiration from Hamlet and other Shakespearean works as well. So we've made it to the end of my 25 classic books you should be reading in 2025. If you've made it this far with me, thank you very much for sticking with it. And now you get to hear the bonus category. So the bonus classics I have here are for those of you that like darker themes, spookier themes, or maybe you're just watching this video around Halloween and you're in the mood for something a little creepy. I wouldn't say any of these are scary necessarily, but there is a certain amount of creep factor. So I have 4 books in this category to suggest to you, and I'm going to give them to you in order of difficulty. So not necessarily how long they are, because the most difficult one on here is actually, I think, the shortest one. But what I think in order from easiest to probably what is most difficult. The first book I have is The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, another very prolific author. And this book deals with the natural and the supernatural, truth and fantasy, and the clash between superstition and reason. When Sir Charles Baskerville is found mysteriously dead in the grounds of Baskerville Hall, everyone remembers the ancient legend of the monstrous creature that haunts the moor. The great detective Sherlock Holmes knows there must be a more rational explanation, but the difficulty is to find it before the hellhound finds him. The next book I have is The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, and this book deals with themes of immorality and the dangers of having no consequences to your actions. With his face swaddled in bandages, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses, and his hands covered even indoors, Griffin, the new guest at the Coach and Horses, is at first assumed to be a shy accident victim. But the true reason for his disguise is far more chilling. He has developed a process that has made him invisible, and is locked in a struggle to discover the antidote. Forced from the village and driven to murder, he seeks the aid of his old friend Kemp. The horror of his fate has affected his mind, however, and when Kemp refuses to help, he resolves to wreak his revenge. The next book I have, you have probably heard of. It is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And this is probably one of the most famous classics on my list. This book deals with the theme of hubris, excessive self-confidence, and the decisions that arise from it. It's the classic creepy novel. Mad scientist doctor gets a crazy idea in his head and goes through with it. I think that Frankenstein will definitely be on my list of creepy books to read right around Halloween in the fall. The last book I have for you is arguably the most complex story to read, and that is The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. I have not read this particular story, but I have read some of Poe's other works that are also famous: The Raven, The Telltale Heart, Lenore, that type of thing. And speaking of, in the beginning of my video, I mentioned a very recent book release that has a lot of ties back to a particular author on my list. Well, that author is Edgar Allan Poe. In Suzanne Collins' latest Hunger Games novel, Sunrise on the Reaping, there are several references to the works of Edgar Allan Poe, in particular, The Raven. The Fall of the House of Usher was recently made into a Netflix series, and I watched it. It was very good. Dark, gory, creepy, but very good. And so I highly recommend going to watch that series if you want, prior to picking up the book. And then maybe afterwards, if you like the series, pick up the book and read the original work. Or read the original work first and then go watch the series. It's up to you. And that's it for my list. Those are all 25 classic books I recommend that you put on your reading TBR, plus an additional 4 in case you want that little bit of creep factor added in. I hope you enjoyed this list. I hope that I encouraged you to pick up a classic or two, that you realize that picking up a classic work has so much value. It doesn't need to be scary. You can start slow, you can start small, and work your way up. Let me know in the comments which books that were on my list you've already read, and which books that you plan to pick up sometime soon. Also, feel free to let me know if you think I missed any classics, or if you disagree with some of my choices. I'd love to hear what you think. It's a very subjective list. Everybody has an opinion, and nobody is wrong. So I hope you have a great day, and if you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate all the support. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.